Welcome to Franchise Empires, where aspiring entrepreneurs learn exactly what it takes to become a successful franchise owner, from one location to 10 and beyond. I'm the Wolf of Franchises.
Hey everyone, it's the Wolf. Today on the show we have Chris Kenny, co-founder and managing partner of Level 5 Capital. Level 5 Capital is a private equity firm that's currently invested in and working with some of the fastest growing and most innovative brands in franchising. Their model is twofold. Not only do they take equity in the franchisor, but they also build numerous locations as franchisees. Chris takes us through his journey into franchising, which started around the time of the Great Financial Crisis, and how that experience morphed into what is Level 5 today, a private equity firm with over $300 million in assets under management. Enjoy the conversation.
The Wolf of Franchises is the CEO of Wolfpack Franchising, as well as a creator at Workweek Media. All opinions expressed by the Wolf and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinion of Wolfpack Franchising or Workweek. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions. The Wolf, Workweek, and Wolfpack Franchising may maintain positions in the franchises discussed on this podcast.
Thanks for coming on the show. And, I think before we kind of dive into your journey into franchising, I've known of Level 5 Capital for a little while now, and I think it's a super unique model that you guys have. So before we kind of dive into your history, can you just give us a primer on what is L5? How do you work with franchises and even, simultaneously with franchisees?
Yeah. So Level 5 is a private equity firm based out of Atlanta, Georgia. We consider ourselves operators in private equity clothing, kind of like wolves in sheep's clothing, right? We're actually business operators at our core. We're super curious people. We aren't financial engineers. Sure, there are legal structures and funds that have to be deployed and whatnot, but our secret sauce is our approach to how we find, how we partner and strategize, and then ultimately scale. Scale being the hardest part. Incredible unit models partnered with great founders, and so we bring a pretty unique approach where we have a classic or traditional private equity team that helps us actually do a deal, right, and work with institutional investors to bring significant capital to bear against great concepts. But then we also have an operating playbook and operating experts, full-time personnel in-house that help us advance core areas of our investments businesses that we see as necessary ingredients that founders don't have the same capabilities or experience in, but are necessary for growth. And how we got to here in that model is just a constant evolution from our entry into franchising.
Amazing. Okay. Yeah. And today, how many brands, have you worked with and are currently working with within the L5 portfolio?
Yeah, we've worked with 8 brands total, and we have 7 today. So we're fully exited from Core Power Yoga, which was a long, great journey and, still personal habit of mine. And then the rest of our brands, we still have some interest in. And so, but when we say we have 7 brands that we're invested in, typically our brands come with a brand investment, a franchisor investment, and an anchor franchisee investment. So we're actually managing more like 13 investments. It's a pretty full work week.
Yeah, no, definitely. I definitely want to get into deeper, kind of the anchor franchisee model and how that works. Before doing that, though, I mean, you're are you the sole founder of L5 or co-founder?
No, I'm a co-founder.
Okay.
I founded the business with my partner Charles Myers.
Okay.
And he and I have known each other for over 20 years, going back to Level 3 Communications, which we're not great namers of holding companies. So we met at a big telecommunications company called Level 3. And we made our first investment, and we needed a holding company, so we called it Level 4 Yoga. It was into Core Power Yoga. And then when things went well there, we said, hey, this can be a platform. We'll just call it Level 5, right? And along the way, many, many employees have joined. And I guess we probably could have put a little bit more thought into what they would all call themselves and what we would call ourselves versus just we need an LLC. But at the
Yeah.
end of the day, it kind of tells you that, culture is king. It doesn't really matter how poorly I name our concepts, as long as our consumer facing concepts resonate better with the end customer.
Agreed. Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think as long as the brands you're working with are at the forefront and are doing well, that definitely matters more. But that's a super interesting journey. So like, how do you go from telecommunications into? I mean, now you've got a franchise portfolio, but I guess it started with just that yoga, with Core Power Yoga. So yeah, how do you go from telecommunications to let's be in the yoga / franchising business?
I don't think we're all that unique. I equate this to, lots of people have sat around with a friend or friends and said, "Let's start a business together. I really like doing this with you," right?
Yeah.
And you have some smart people who are serious about investing and know that it's not free, meaning like you don't just get a franchise or any business and things just magically occur. Like you could 10 years ago, maybe drop an app into the app store and, get a million downloads like that. That was pretty, there's periods of unique times, but generally it just takes nights and weekends to get it going. Ours was actually, Charles and mine was actually not origined by, us saying, let's start a business together. I actually hurt my knee skiing, operatively skiing. We lived in Colorado at the time, working for Level 3 Communications, and it was a big powder day. And I wiped out on a huge powder day. And when I was walking back up to my skis to bend over to grab my skis, I twisted my knee and I had to end up getting surgery on it as a result of that
Wow.
from just a functional movement, right? And so I was explaining this to Charles, and I was kind of perplexed because I'm not a big guy. I'm actually pretty lithe, but I go to the gym, at that point, 4 or 5 days a week, 5 a.m., angry dude handing me towels. He didn't want to be there. I didn't want to be there. And for all that, I can't even pick up my skis on a powder day without, taking 6 months off to rehab, right? For really no
Yeah.
reason. And it really just clicked in my head when Charles said, "Hey, you really should try yoga, right? It's actually much better for your body. And I think you're going to like where this heads your life, right?" And it really started, CrossFit wasn't a thing yet when we, started looking at this in early 2000s. And it brought into view functional movement, right? So when you're at your house on the weekends picking up your kids, it's not like standing in front of a weight machine, right? You're doing really
Yeah.
weird movements, right? And that's why you see now NFL players and all kinds of professional athletes are constantly flexing and stressing their body in different ways. And that's how sports have evolved. But so we got into yoga that way. I took a class at Core Power at their second studio, and I thought I was going to hate it. I thought everybody was going to smell. People were doing handstands, and I was like, I'm never going to get here on this. And I'm not an anti person, but it just didn't seem like my thing. But then boom, class ended, and everybody was chatting, and they're like, "Hey, let's go to a bar." And I'm like, I didn't think you guys went to bars, right? But that's just what you read, and then what reality is, right? And so I got into it, and ultimately, Charles had met the founder. I got introduced to the founder, and they needed to raise money when the Lehman Brothers, blew up, great financial crisis, and we led a round into them. And what we really wanted, though, we led a round into the franchisor, a meaningful round. What we really wanted was to be an anchor franchisee because we loved the unit model and we loved working on it. Right. And so we started with one studio, right, in Oak Park, Illinois. Charles had one or two in Colorado on his own. We eventually merged them all together. But we started with one studio in Oak Park, Illinois. And I remember, doing the lease, finding the site, being bored, driving around, building IKEA furniture, hiring people. And then you're there at 6 a.m. on Monday on the first day of class, and you're like, is anyone going to come? Like you have so much energy to get to this,
Yeah.
certain moment. And then, sure enough, they did, but we wanted them to come faster, right? And you just kind of get curious
Of
about
course.
that process, right? So that's what got us on our journey. We started with one store, and I lived it. I actually checked in people at the desk 4 days a week at 5:45 in the morning, and then I went to my day job.
Holy crap. Okay. Wow. That's incredible. Okay. So, an injury kind of forced you into Core Power as a customer, and then you loved it. And seems like, I mean, let's call it fortuitous timing. Obviously, it was a bad time for many in the GFC, but you guys saw an opportunity and took it. I mean, still though, from communications, which I'm not sure what you're doing in telecommunications specifically, but that's a totally different, right? Like a totally different.
It is and it isn't, though. I mean,
Yeah,
everything translates down to numbers and ratios and things like that. And from our perspective, still to this day, we look at it this simply: like a Big Blue swim school costs $2.5 to $3.5 million to open. It's going to do $2.5 to $3.5 million top line at about a 25% EBITDA margin, and it's going to pay back in under about 48 months, right? And that's from our own book of franchise assets that gets published into our item 19, right? So I'm not revealing anything that's all that secret, but we take those same words about every business we invest in, and it's no different than if I go back to telecommunications. Google needs a 10 gigabit circuit from us. They are 1 mile from where we have, telecommunications infrastructure. We got to dig up the street to them. It's going to cost $10 million. They need to pay us this much over 5 years for us to have this payback on it. It really, it's that simple. There's lots of, complicated things and millions of decisions that have to get made, under the books of it. But when you ultimately decide that you like this, right, and you're curious about it, and you don't think that it's been professionalized yet fully, right? Our founders that we meet have done a phenomenal job of getting it, as far as they have. But to get, 2 units to 5 units into 100 to 500 units and get that consistency there, that's the real hard work to do, because it requires capture of data, training, people, gospel, disagreement and how to handle disagreement, et cetera, right? So I don't actually think they're all that different. There is experience that comes with dealing with the different customer types, right? So in the telecom world, you have 100 customers in the world that matter, that make up 80% of the spend, right? In the consumer world, it's everybody, right? And there's good and bad things about that, but I think mostly good.
Yeah. No, so I hear you on the number side. I guess, well, if you could figure out operationally how to dig up a trench and, I don't know,
work with governments to do that.
Yeah, that does sound a lot more complicated. I'm just, I'm thinking the operations side, like, you didn't know necessarily how to run a yoga studio, but I think it's still, there's entrepreneurs, right, who maybe they get into it and then they realize, oh, like, I have things to figure out and I've never done this before. I suppose you just are the type of guy who maybe you had the confidence, you're like, we're going to be able to figure it out, how to get customers in the door, how to hire yoga trainers versus, still though, operationally, right, totally
convince
different than digging trenches for Google.
In prime real estate to put a yoga studio front and center, right?
Yeah,
or a swim school where we're going to dig out a pool and have them get concerned about it. In general, the consumer wants new and experiences and discovery. And by definition, we're going to surprise landlords with what we want to put in their space, right? And so it kind of just is, what is the next thing we need to convince them? Okay, well, we're going to put in a bar for dogs and parents, pet parents into front and center real estate, right? Well, you know why? Because municipal code doesn't allow dogs in most restaurants and bars, right? Well, so let's create one that tries to strip away a lot of those things that trip you up, so that we can actually have a place where 65 million American households can hang out outside of their house as a third space, a Starbucks, call it, with their dog, right? And not, just a park, right? It's got to be 4 seasons and it's got to have some nice bathrooms. These are not like difficult things to consider, that they're clearly first world problems, but they're, ultimately you can look back at them and say, why didn't I think this was going to be a consumer staple?
Yeah. That's a super interesting way of looking at it. I love the reference to the third space too. Yeah, I hear you completely on the pets. There is nothing out there right now that offers that, at least at a nationwide basis. Maybe mom and pops and independents there are, but
and the parallels there with Core Power Yoga too, because Core Power, the yoga instructors and the students would hang out after class almost permanently. Right, we'd have to be like, guys, it's time to go home. Like we can't take your safety after 10 p.m. Right, like this is nothing good happens after 10 on a Tuesday. Let's go home. Right,
for sure.
But that's when you've got a following, right, that you can unlock. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. No, those are super compelling metrics and just anecdotal data points, let's say, to see. So, back to great financial crisis time, you get involved with Core Power Yoga. At what point does it click? Like, hey, let's do this for other franchises, because maybe was there a moment, or how did that develop?
Yeah, no, there was. I mean, we were constantly, so Core Power was, great relationship with them over the years, but they were a quasi franchisor, more of a licensor. So they didn't really provide us services to help us run our business. So the question of how did you go from telecom to yoga? Well, Core Power didn't really teach us. They were like, here's a flow of a yoga class. Here's a couple logos. Call us if you need anything, and please send 6% of revenue, right? And that was about it, right? And so we developed most of our core competencies around marketing, around pre-sales, around how to sell a yoga membership, what percentage of our visitors should be on memberships, where should we locate our real estate. So we ultimately had enough scale. We went from one yoga studio to 34 yoga studios over 5 states. In a handful of years, and we had to develop a lot of our own best practices. And so we attempted to buy Core Power. We partnered up with a private equity firm. We lost out to L. Catterton in 2013, and we were like, well, that's not going to be the end of our story. We can't solely be controlled in this box of a quasi growth pattern. And no harm, no foul on the relationship. That was just how it was set up. So we sought out to go find something that we could apply all the skills we had learned against to. And we decided to go in, or our initial thesis was to look for something in the kids swim space. We saw a lot of great parallels there. Took us a couple of years to frame up a deal and find the right group, but we ultimately invested in Big Blue Swim School. Our plan was originally to do corporate owned stores there. What happened though is that stores 3 and 5 outperformed our pro formas. We bought it when they had 2 swim schools. Stores 3 and 5 outperformed our pro formas by 30 and 40% respectively. And I'm an optimist, so they were pretty good performances. And we quickly said, this is probably a national opportunity that if we stick to only corporate stores and only our capital, we're going to miss out on a national opportunity. But, given at that point, swim schools, cost $2 million to open, and we thought there could be 400 or 500, that's $800 to $1 billion in CapEx. We didn't want to lose control of a brand again. And we knew how to do most of franchising, right? And so we took the leap. We invested in some really key talent and partners around franchise development, Scott Thompson, and franchise operations. And we just invested, and we kept learning how do we make third-party franchisees successful with the training and unit model that we know we're going to professionalize ourselves. And I kind of go back to, this is one of my favorite, quotes in franchising, but Sam Meineke said, if you don't successfully put the franchisee in business such that they can make it, that's like stealing from them. And we go back to that again and again and again. So we're like, unit model, can we teach it, right? And then it is our responsibility to ensure that within our power, we should do almost everything we can to make that person successful. Now, there are people who are not successful because of themselves, but there are people that are not successful because we didn't help them. And given that they pay a fee up front and they pay an ongoing royalty, we want that long-term relationship with them for store 1 to be profitable, so that store 2 is profitable, so that store 3 gets built, 4, 5, 6, etc. And ideally, a multi-concept relationship over time for those who have fire in the belly to do that.
Yeah, no, I mean, that quote is fantastic. I've actually never heard that before, but I love kind of the ethos.
It was actually hard to find, right? But I was like, gosh, there's so many successful franchisors out there that the industry is almost now just getting discovered, that we don't know so much of the learning and history. It's almost like we need a Wikipedia for franchising and a historian we all just fund with 0.1% of franchise fees to make sure we don't lose the lessons of the past.
Yeah, it's brilliant, and I completely agree. And so when I think about your model, right, with L5, you guys take, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you invest in the franchisor, so you capitalize them, which I think is important, especially given the way that a lot of the industry works, where a lot of franchisors depend on brokers who take away a pretty healthy portion of franchise fee commissions. So you're capitalizing franchisors, you're professionalizing let's call it the operations as a franchisee by being an anchor franchisee. And And yeah, is that effectively just the high level thesis for how you operate with, any of your
Yeah,
brands?
I mean, step one is, we operate in the consumer services space, which is large and growing, right? The consumer represents 70% of the economy. There's a high portion of that that goes to durable goods, but a growing portion of it going to services, and that's been a macro trend for 20 years, and it's growing, right? The consumer wants services and experiences. They want to better their lives in ways that we didn't consider 20 years ago. So we play in that space, and what we then do is we look at around our lives, where are people starting to invest more of their time and treasure, and do we think those can be profitable unit models? Are they already profitable unit models? Maybe they're 2 to 5 units, 10 to 20, et cetera. And we start to get to know those people. Do we want to work with them? Do we really think this unit model, based on the numbers and the demographics and the psychographics, can translate into something that's we can meaningfully spend our time on for 5 to 7 years? I mean, there's dollars, and then there's time and effort, right? And I always like to say that you want to get out of bed out in the morning and put your feet on the floor working on problems that you're excited to solve, because they're all going to be hard, right? So when we do that, we find these unit models, and then we do our research on the unit model, and then where we think the white space is for these unit models. And we have a 5-person in-house team that just looks at our white space for us and helps us analyze it and the customer. We then find out, well, Boardwalk and Park Place are available in most of our favorite markets across the country, and why wouldn't we want to own those? They're not developed yet for that franchisor. We're by no means taking all of the best sites. We're taking a small fraction of the best sites in the country to get the pump rolling, right? So we've found the unit model, we found the founders and management team we want to work with, we've done our empirical work, and then we're invested in the franchisor and the brand. We're getting rolling, and we're like, okay, let's truly look at, can we accelerate this brand with our own physical store footprint as well? And it's almost like a quasi corporate store play. But for us, we just know certain markets really well, and if we have fidelity and belief that this concept can be meaningful nationally, and we like the returns on it, it generally allows us to go faster in our franchise growth strategy. So typically, L5 will be about 15 to 20% of the system when we look at an exit for the business, but we might be 70% of the system for the first 2.5 years, right? And we don't.
Yeah.
I kind of date myself with this reference, but I watched a lot of movies growing up. I didn't learn English through watching movies, but I watched a lot of movies. But I always go back to the Hunt for Red October, which is just a great one. And the Soviets had to learn to turn their safeties off of their torpedoes because they were too close. Or the Americans had to turn their safeties off. That's what it was. The Americans had to. And so, but for L5, we've been doing this for so long. There are no safeties on our process. Our process is written. So as a franchisee, we can just move really quickly, right?
Nice.
Whereas a new franchisee, often is having to ask the question, well, why do we need to be here? And not in a bad way, they're learning, right? But it tends to be that we're about 50% faster. If you kind of start the tortoise and the hare at the start line together, we're about 50% faster than the field, right? If we recruited somebody to build 10 people to build 10 stores, we'll get 10 built before they will.
Yeah, no, I believe that for sure. And when I hear you speak about kind of the model and even mentioning possibility for an exit, right? So I think you said earlier you had 8 brands total, 7 of them are active investments, and this started over a decade ago at this point. So correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, typical PE fund is, I feel like, looking at a 3 to 5 year timeline for maybe flipping an investment. You guys seem to have a longer term time horizon. Is that accurate?
Well, I'd say 2 things. One is 2019 is when we raised our first fund. And so it took us a long time to raise that fund, because about a year later, before that, we were investing out of our own accounts and with friends, and family. And so we were, doing it with, people we knew, right? But we had some great successes that allowed us to raise third-party money. And, we'd done that in the public markets before with Level 3 and other places, right? So we had credibility to go raise a private fund. So 2019, we had our first close in our first fund. We closed that fund actually 2 years later because of the pandemic, right? So we had a long fundraising window, and then Fund 2 started in 2022, right? So we're kind of newer to the fund space. So, our first investment would have been in 2019 with Orangetheory, but we didn't make our second investment until a year later in 2020 with Restore, right? In the funds space, right? But going back to your
Yeah.
core question, in general, we do not look at our businesses and say we can flip these in 3 years. We are builders of businesses. I shared with you that we're, operators in private equity clothing. We are, looking at this much more like we've got to get the short strokes in to get some momentum in the boat. And private equity is much more of the business is already moving, the canoe is already moving, and you can take really long, powerful strokes, and the direction's already set. We're trying to keep the thing stable on the rails with our knowledge and our best practices out of the gates and accelerate them. And so for us, I would say our average hold period is going to be, 5 years plus.
Amazing. Yeah. And, just to give folks kind of an idea of the size, what was, how much total assets raised for Fund 1 and Fund 2?
Well, right now we're just under 300 million under management. So we're pretty hefty at this point, but we're also building physical stores. So those are pretty high ticket, right?
Yeah.
And so, for us, our Fund 1, was about 170 million in aggregate of total funds directed towards those concepts. And our Fund 2, which we're still raising, today, is, just over $100 million, and it's headed towards its, $250 million target fund size.
Amazing. Yeah. I think, for the model you got, I don't know of another PE firm that does this anchor franchisee model, which is why I think it's so fascinating. But yeah, I can totally understand. Like, of course, these are more capital intensive builds, right? If you're going out and building, how many, like 20, 30, 40 locations potentially even, or is that too high?
Yeah, we'll have, we invested in Heyday skincare in March of 2021, and we're currently sitting on 10, 12 locations, right? So in that quick window, we open 10 or 12 ourselves, right?
Yeah.
But we're generally looking at making, depending on the CapEx per unit, we're generally looking at making 25 to 50 unit investments over a 5 to 7 year period.
Okay. Fantastic.
But those are some of the bigger franchise deals, an established franchisor would sign, right?
Yeah.
And we're signing them with people that have, 5, 10, 20 stores, and we're committing to, double or triple the size of the system.
Yeah. So
now, again, the unit model has to follow through, right? It's got to scale. It's got to do the things it needs to do to generate the cash flow to have all those units get built. No different than the promise we make to our franchisees of we're going to put you in business and help you, have a really good go at it. There's nothing that makes us happier than seeing franchisees smiling so big because their lives have changed as a result of partnering on brands that we're doing together, right? We do view it as a partnership together.
Yeah. And I think one of the key things you said there is, right, the size of the deals you're doing, and then at the state, given the stage of the franchisor where, you are committing quite a hefty unit amount, even though maybe the franchisor doesn't have, more than 3 to 5 locations open. And for instance, if avid listeners of this podcast may have remembered, I interviewed the founder of GoDog. That is an L5 Capital brand. So, I believe they only had about 3 corporate locations, right, at the time you guys invested in them.
They had when we invested, they had 2 open, 1 under construction, and 2 in development.
Yeah. Okay. And I think the investment size, if I recall, was around, let's call it 15 million.
It's 20 million.
How? Yeah. So I think I remember after that episode, people, I got a few DMs on Twitter like, hey, that was super cool. That founder was awesome. But they're like, what am I missing? How does a brand get $50 or $20 million investment, from with only 3 locations? So how do you kind of size that up? Because how do you know? You must be very confident, and obviously you have the belief that you're going to grow it nationally. But yeah, at that early stage, what are these metrics that say, hey, let's invest?
I think that maybe being viewed in some ways as like, a small, teapot or teacup, right? When we're looking at the GoDog, investment, but what we're looking at is a unit model, right? Regardless of name. I mean, brand matters for sure, and that mattered a lot
Yeah.
to us in the GoDog investment. But we're looking at a unit model that is doing a significant amount of revenue, top line, and a significant amount of profitability bottom line in an industry that's massive and growing, right? And so our question is more about, do we think that that can be done again, right? And if we do, right, how much are we willing to put behind codifying and scaling that? Remember, I go back to that, at the beginning of our conversation, scaling, right? And scaling costs money, right? So we want to go in and say, okay, well, can we write all of the operations manuals and do all the training videos for GoDog such that we can use those to train the employees on the store that L5 is going to open in Q3 of this year, and then every store thereafter, such that franchisees call us and say, that was great. I don't need anything else from you guys on how to run one of these inside the four walls. And they become more profitable for us, right? But it's not like we invested in American Ninja Warrior before anybody knew what it was, right? We're investing in doggy daycare and dog boarding, which are very common, and there are lots of today. We've diligenced to the nth degree. We just found the right partner and right opportunity with GoDog, right? There were a lot of conversations that happened, and this is the one that we wanted to put all the wood behind the arrow on, right?
Yeah. Okay. No, that makes sense. So it's almost, I mean, it's a variety of factors, I take it, but it sounds like, just the industry matters, right? The tailwinds / headwinds in the industry, like you guys are really factoring in many different things before just obviously writing a check and committing the time and effort to building locations for a specific franchise.
Well, and these founders, Ben and Jess, knew their business inside and out, right? And so we were confident that we could mind meld with them. Again, another movie reference there for you. But we could mind meld with them to translate their knowledge and performance on those units to a consistent outcome for franchisees, including ourselves, right? And so we need, talented founders with existing massive skin in the game and knowledge and care for scaling to partner with to get the best of what we do and the best of what they do together to grow.
Yeah, and without I don't want to ask like the details of the deals you do with these founders, but if a franchisor founder is listening to this and they're wondering about what is it actually like to partner with L5, are the founders, you mentioned skin in the game, is the goal to have them incentivized for a long time, or does it vary by deal where maybe L5 kind of does step in and really runs the show from as the franchisor?
It really varies by deal. Ultimately, there's not, I would say, a cookie cutter approach to it. There's not a million ways to do it. Otherwise that'd be really difficult to transact, right? But for us, it really matters on the industry, how much momentum the business has, how defined it is, how kind of like it appears to be push button, or how much work we're going to have to do alongside the team to get it to where it needs to be. How long is it going to take? I mean, that's a really important factor in it, because like GoDog and Big Blue is a much longer real estate cycle than a Heyday or a Kidstrong, as an example.
Yeah.
But there's benefits to a longer, more capital intensive real estate cycle as well, with moats around your business, right?
So when I had Scott Thompson a while back on the podcast, he mentioned that too, that it's that can be viewed as a moat. So yeah, can you talk more about that? Because I think a lot of franchise concepts, particularly the ones I either talk about in my newsletter or the franchisees I have in this podcast, I'd say, let's just call it the majority of them, if it's a brick and mortar brand, it's, a brand that probably predominantly is going into a strip mall, which could be anywhere from a couple $100,000 to $600,000 to $700,000 investment. However, can you just dive into how do you view, like, as a moat for a brand? Because I think it might be, to me, it was counterintuitive, where I'm thinking it's harder to find franchisees who can build these locations if it's multiple millions of dollars, right? Your franchisee potential prospect list goes down just as the investment goes higher. But it seems like your guys' thesis is we actually think it's a moat in the long term.
Yeah, there's lots of different ways to get to a moat in franchising. I mean, you can have, relatively low cost franchise business that, is massive and just has a massive brand fund that, creates that moat itself, right? And then you can have, other ones that, the unit model is so strong and, other people just haven't really diagnosed how to put it together like that, or there's special sauce around how they do it. But then they eventually grow so big that they're hard to compete with again because of their moat and their location quality and their brand quality. So for us, we don't approach it with, hey, this must be expensive, so it is a moat. That is definitely not our approach. What we are trying to do is find the right real estate to the best degree possible for each brand, such that it's difficult but not impossible to outposition it in the marketplace, right? And so you're not trying to thread a needle, but you're definitely trying to be, as one of our real estate leads would always say, you're trying to be in the right church, but also in the right pew. Are you going to the groom side or the bride side? It does matter, right? If mom is driving by and she's only ever on the right side of that road, you want to be on the right side of that road, right? There's because the school that she's dropping off at may only let her out going on a different street, right? So, it's just there's little things that come down to these localities that make all these decisions important. But for us, it really does come down to the returns on the unit model. We're not averse to high capex. It definitely makes the franchise sales process different. I wouldn't say impossible, because there's lots of, capital is like water. It seeks its level. Capital is looking for return, right? And there are people who have larger piles of capital that don't want to make, 1,000 different investments. They want to make a few that are meaningful, and franchising is great for those. So let's just take, for example, one of the larger cost CapEx franchises out there is hotels. I mean, it's hard to think of much more expensive ones than that, than maybe a regional franchise airline of Delta, right? Those are expensive too. But the hotel business, right? You've got to, if you're stepping into a new brand by Marriott, you're taking some risk. But that Marriott has said, we've done a lot of consumer research. There's a hole in our portfolio, and they're going to go to their existing franchisee base and say, we'd like you guys to develop $10 million Indigos, right? Whatever it is. Indigo is an IHG brand. It's not a Marriott, but I think you get my point. Yeah,
no, that's a really interesting way to frame it. Specifically, capital being like water.
I have a hard time keeping track of. I really should walk around with one of those metal counters that you count people with one day or 1 week and just try and figure out how many franchises I walked into or consumed from. Right? Because it's way higher than anybody thinks, including me.
100%. Yeah, I have the disease fully at this point, where anytime I drive by a strip mall or, any just brick and mortar business, I'm thinking, is that a franchise? Have I seen that? Have I looked at their FTD? It's bad. Yeah. And for a good number of years, I was purely a franchisee. We're a very large franchisee on behalf of our investors, but I was just a franchisee, and I say it just like that. I was just a franchisee, right? So I go to cocktail parties, and you've got lawyers and doctors and scientists, and they're like, "What are you?" And I'm like, "I'm a franchisee," and I like that, but they're like, "Oh, weird. Now let's go to the other side of the room from this guy," right? So it does have you're kind of feel like at some point you're like the guy with toilet paper on your shoe to some degree. So it's funny. That is when I found myself in this world of franchising, I don't want to say I bought into the stigma, but I was just, I wasn't necessarily thrilled at the beginning of my franchising career. I was like, oh, how did I end up here? What is this? And then as I got to meet more and more franchisees, really saw just how incredible and empowering the whole model could be on both sides. And that's kind of been my goal. It's just, I do think you're right. If people aren't familiar with it, they probably get a weird vibe, and it's maybe not as yeah, it doesn't get as much respect as it deserves, is what I'd say. But anyway,
And you know what? Ultimately, I become fine with that, because if it had more respect, there'd be more people here, be more competitive. So I make my peace with
yeah,
it at the end of the
no,
day.
it's a good point. No
Um,
one's looking at it.
you know, I think that what's really important in franchising is, and for us, right? We have such a broad view of the consumer, and how the consumer consumes, and how business models and management teams approach the consumer and evaluate it. And it's funny where people get hung up. Where I explained to you the very top level of the unit model, right? $3 million to build a big blue, 3 million top line, 25% EBITDA margin, and that like sounds really simple, right? But what's really important is like getting the big pieces down so you can start to work your way toward the highest return investments, right? And where you can get eventually with scale, because you can get to your highest return investment of your next incremental customer at one already profitable business, and you can see sub 4 month paybacks on acquisition cost, right? And why that's important is that I explained to you, like, we're looking for sub 48 month paybacks in non-fad spaces, and we want to see sub 30 month paybacks in spaces that are like a bit more risky, right? But when you get to scale and you're starting to look at, okay, if I spend $50 on Facebook, I can get a customer that's 90% profit, right? You're gotten to the point of the model where it's incredibly profitable, but you cannot do that from store 2 or store 3. You've got to get a platform and a team that is actually working towards these things and has got a lot of the problems behind them, such that you're now kind of working your way up towards the highest order, highest return issues. And that's what we can uniquely help people unlock, right? Because we've built that stepping stone path to do that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I can see it's not something you can do from day one. But clearly at this point, I mean, you guys do have that platform impact. And so, you have a variety of brands, right? You've mentioned GoDog, Big Blue, Core Power, Kid Strong, Heyday. Also, I know recently, right, you guys invested in 2U Laundry, who's on the franchise side,
Yep.
known as Laundry Lab. I've known, the founders reached out to me quite a while ago, just, through my newsletter, Dan and Alex, and, seem like great guys. What was compelling about that investment for you? I think it's funny. We were just talking about, right, franchisees and franchising as a whole. People don't necessarily give it the respect it deserves. And a laundry franchise, it's kind of the epitome, right, of an unsexy business, but you guys made quite a big investment and see a lot of potential there. So, what excited you kind of about Laundry Lab and 2U?
Yeah. Well, I think on that one, it was really the founders that excited us first. We met them, and we just, we've known them for a long time now, coming on 3 years. And they were just so curious and so great to work with, and again, so humble. And they just, kept grinding out all of their little challenges. And they're so good at all the little things. It took us a long time to unpack the two big unit models they developed and how they interoperate in a really kind of win-win-win scenario for 2U, Laundry Lab franchisor, and Laundry Lab franchisee, and how that all works, right? Such that we at one point were calling it Laundry Lab, right? And we had to remind ourselves, like, no, it's 2U, and Laundry Lab supports 2U, and vice versa, right? So it's a really interesting relationship and dynamic. But the whole breakdown of that business is in the Laundry Lab space, is that laundromat customers use that business Saturday and Sunday, right? That is when that customer is able to go to a laundromat. 2U's business needs laundry machines Monday to Friday, right? And so that's just an incredible synergy to leverage, where you can get two utilizations on top of one asset towards the same ultimate goal. And Dan and Alex figured out how to do that, and then we're there really to help them make it simpler, right? I wanted to write a short letter, but I could only write a long one, right? Kind of issue. And then secondly, scale it, right? And so, the scaling components are, how do we do this in Tampa? how do we do this in Dallas? How do we do this in LA? There are unique pieces to it, but it all starts with, you got to bring your data in. You have to have nomenclature, data dictionary, all those different things, and start to build those pieces around the business. But at the end of the day, when you put the 2U business, like the volume on top of the existing Laundry Lab customer, it creates a really powerful unit model and return profile. And we really couldn't be more excited about the opportunity we've got ahead of us there with the 2U team.
Yeah, no, I was excited, honestly, to hear that that partnership had formed. Because I definitely agree. It's a super compelling kind of dual concept there. And yeah, I'm excited to see what you guys do with it. I think it's going to be a pretty awesome ride for everyone involved.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, look,
at the end of the day, everything we do,
Yeah.
we like to focus on things that are improving people's lives, right? So Kid Strong and Big Blue help families' lives, right? 2U and Laundry Lab help families in two different ways, in two different socioeconomic classes, right? And they do meaningfully improve the time and quality spent together for people, and that's things that we get excited about, putting our feet on the floor in the morning,
Yeah.
and of course generating an economic return for our investors and our franchisees.
Definitely. Yeah. And as we look, if maybe we zoom out a little bit more broadly onto L5, where do you see this going long term? Are you do you have any North Star or almost, inspirations? Is there, do you look at Rourke Capital and say, we want to kind of do that? Rourke Capital obviously has tons of different investments, but it largely QSR focused, right? Do you have any longer term ambitions for what L5 will be?
I think we're at least for our medium term hitting the scale that we want to operate at. We want to be able to partner with early growth brands and founders, and we think that this is a unique part of the marketplace that, while we've been addressing it for 10 years, we're 10 years ahead of many others on addressing it. We think we can continue to outdistance a group of people in that space. And frankly, we are like the consumer. We like new and discovery. And so, in this space, we want to be seen as people who can help scale new and discoverable things in this massive country we live in. And look, O'Rourke and Catterton and others occupy a different space in the scale of the environment, and we're happy to have them be the next rung after level 5 in the capital structure placement of our investments. We can't be permanent capital always for our investments. That's not how we're set up. And so we're happy to kind of just be a good 5 to 7 year chunk, great partnerships, good times, tough times, et cetera, as we grow them. That's not to say we won't grow, but right now 1.5 to 2 brands a year, and we generally are looking at 30 a year, and that's all we can really look at. So it takes a lot of work to scale these businesses, and we have to make hard choices quite often. But it doesn't mean if we can't work with a brand now that we can't work with them next year, and they just take on a smaller amount of capital in between, and we pay at a slightly higher valuation. We just kind of try and be transparent about what we can and can't do with concepts we want to work with and management teams we want to work with.
Amazing. Yeah, no, it's it'll be fun to see kind of how you guys evolve, and also just again the scale you are able to hit with your existing portfolio. So yeah, Chris, thanks for coming on the show and kind of sharing with us about L5 and how it all works. I think it's going to be a cool perspective for people to hear. Is there anywhere online where people can follow Level 5 or yourself personally?
Yeah, we're easiest found on LinkedIn, Chris Kenny, Kenny, on LinkedIn, and pretty easy to find, and Level 5 there, and look forward to hearing from people.
Amazing. Okay, great. Well, yeah, look, we'll plug that in the show notes, folks, so you can give them a follow on LinkedIn, and as well as Chris. And yeah, Chris, thanks again for coming on the show, and hopefully we do this again maybe in a few years when the portfolio is even bigger and you've had some more successes.
Sounds great to me. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me here, and congrats on your success too.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Franchise Empires. We're coming to you soon with actionable insights to take the next step on your franchise journey. So make sure to subscribe on Apple, Spotify, Google, or wherever you listen.